Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and can I thank all three organisers for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be here, and can I say a special word of thanks to Ben for putting this together. Publishing edited collections is probably the least pleasant thing in the world of publishing, because unless you get goodwill from your contributors, it's really the person's worst nightmare. So thank you, Ben, for that, and it's a terrific volume. I thought I'd start with the question of democracy, given where we are and given the history of this beautiful church hall. So the first thing to say about migrations, I think that for too long, some very reasonable concerns about the volume and the pace of immigration here, but also elsewhere in Europe, as I think a lot of election results now suggest, those concerns have been ignored. And I think that not only is a problem for how to deal with migration, but also has corrosive effects on democracy, because people end up losing trust in political institutions and in elected politicians and others. So the first thing to say is immigration is and has been for some time one of the biggest issues in political and democratic debate. And I do some work with some Labour MPs for, I was going to say for all my sins, but that doesn't sound quite right. But they have always, told me this story from the 2015 election campaign, where they were instructed by party headquarters that if anyone raised immigration on the doorstep, that they should change subject. So in essence, the message was, no, immigration isn't a problem. What you're really worried about is jobs. What you're really worried about is housing. What you're really worried about is health. But that's no way of dealing with voters and with citizens. So that's really the first point to make. But democracy isn't only about majority will or the sovereignty of the people, though that is an important component. But democracy is also about how we live together, including with people with whom we passionately disagree over Brexit and over other issues. And democracy is about more than just coexistence. It's also about forming some civic or social bonds, because after all, without those bonds, there's no trust. Without trust, there's no cooperation, and again, democracy is in big trouble. And finally, democracy is also about notions of flourishing. How does democracy help me, help you, help every one of us to flourish and lead a good life? And on that basis, I think, looking at immigration, we get a rather different perspective than just a question of numbers. Do we need a target in the 10,000s or in the 100,000s? Or, the idea that somehow if you even raise the question, you're already bigoted or a racist just for even bringing it up. Because ultimately, democracies can't just be run on, I think, the two dominant conceptions of justice that we've had in the last few decades. One is just about utility. It's basically saying, as long as the aggregate effect is positive, we don't worry about the rest. So if the overall effect of immigration is good for the economy, why should we worry? We can just address the little concerns by, distributing a bit of money here and maybe managing it in a sort of top-down way. And that's, I think, not right. Nor is the idea that somehow immigration is just about freedoms or individual rights. Because, again, democracy involves much more. Democracy involves notions of the common good, because that's what a good life and flourishing is all about. And the common good isn't just the aggregation of individual goods. It's basically all the relationships we have in common, all the relational goods that we can only have by working together. And that really comes, I think, largely from Catholic social teaching and cognate traditions in other Christian churches and denominations. And that's really about two or three important things I want to raise very quickly, and then I'll conclude with some concrete proposals. The first is the dignity of the person, that we're not just isolated individuals somehow bound together by contract or right, but rather that there's something intrinsically worthwhile about each and every one of us. So it is about equality, but it's about the intrinsic worth of human beings. And that means we are not just reducible to being commodities. So migrants shouldn't just be seen as people who have skills, and that's why we want some of them, but not others. They are also people with intrinsic worth, and we shouldn't just reduce that to some economic utility or value. The common good isn't simply about, as I said, just adding up things. It's about what enables us to live and flourish together. So it's about much more than just wealth or power. It's about that which enables us to live out all of our talents, our vocations, and be valued as unique persons. And then there's this point about mutual obligations. That we can't have a democracy which is just about individual rights or entitlements. You don't just take from society, you also give something, you make a contribution. And you don't just get owed something, you also owe something to others and to society as a whole. And you can't really treat people who've just come into the country as people who deserve exactly the same as someone who's made a contribution for 30, 40, 50 years. That is in some sense a violation of a natural sense of justice. A contribution, right, is something that deserves some sort of reward. Now, people in extreme hardship, of course, deserve our help, of course, deserve our compassion and our assistance. But when it comes to social housing for economic migrants, you can't just say, well, they've just come into the country, they'll just jump the queue, and someone else who's been waiting for 10 years, will wait for another 5 or 10 years. And if you think this is a political point, it isn't. It comes straight out of the teaching of the Catholic Church, and I just want to read one quote by Pope Francis, because Pope Francis is often portrayed as someone who's just in favor of migrants and has nothing to say about, if you like, the other side. Absolutely not true. Here's what he says: "The Church stands at the side of all who work to defend each person's right to live with dignity, first and foremost by exercising the right not to emigrate and to contribute to the development of one's own country of origin." In other words, what the Pope is saying is, wherever possible, we want to help people where they already are. And we want to help them because we owe it to them if they live in hardship, to help them where they are, but also because it's better for them to stay in their societies. If they want to, and if it's no civil war and no persecution, why should they only be able to lead a better life by coming to us? Most people don't want to leave their home country. They want to flourish with the people with whom they've grown up. And if there is no, as I said, reason like civil war or persecution, then perhaps it's better to help them than to, in some sense, say, well, we'll help them when they come over here. Think of all the risks involved in the journeys, the way it enriches the smugglers, etc., etc. And so what does that mean in concrete terms? Very briefly, because I've only got a minute left. It means distinguishing refugees who genuinely need our help and who I think we should welcome and be very compassionate and generous with from economic migrants. Now, that won't work for all cases, but it will work for a lot of cases. And I think that is a distinction we need to be very clear about. Secondly is offer real sanctuary to those who suffer persecution or who are fleeing a civil war. Be very, generous. Of course, help them with integrating, into our societies, but certainly provide proper protection and sanctuary. Thirdly, help migrants where they are. So really make sure that development aid and everything that the NGOs do, which is very important, helps people where they are. Doesn't mean that 80% of the money that we give in development aid will flow back to British or American or other businesses. It has to help the people where they live. Otherwise, they will probably want to leave their home country and come here. And finally, it also means helping those who are here to integrate, and in exchange for help, language training, skills, and so on, also really make sure that they integrate, that they embrace the culture they live in, that they're able to make a contribution at some point so that it's not just a one-way street. And finally, help people who are here, indigenous or immigrant, to get the skills, to get the housing, to get the school places and the health service so that they don't feel that somehow development is at their expense. In other words, Catholic social teaching and other Christian traditions really think about that idea of reciprocity. Right? Yes, we help you when you need it, but you also have to make a contribution. Thank you very much.